So, what drove a licensed attorney to become a psychic medium and to eventually make a career change? Do deceased loved ones communicate with us and send us messages from the other side? Do we have any reason to fear death and what awaits us on the other side? And if we knew what awaits us, would we live our lives differently? Is there a spiritual movement afoot, and is there a spiritual aspect to the UFO phenomena? The social psychic Jason Zook joins me to talk about these things and more on this episode of Passion for the Paranormal. Okay, so joining me tonight is Jason Zook, and Jason is an intuitive psychic medium residing in Tampa, Florida, and he's also a licensed attorney. Jason adopted the pseudonym Jason Zook in honor of his grandfather, whose death inspired him on his spiritual path. When Jason's grandfather passed away in August of 2004, he developed his intuitive abilities and realized that he possessed the ability to communicate with the other side. Since that time, Jason has read for hundreds of people, and he has learned that our deceased loved ones tend to remain with us after they cross over to the other side. Jason, appreciate you joining me tonight.
Thank you so much for having me today. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be on your show, Kurt. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I always like having discussions with people who are in the spiritual work like you're in. They always make for interesting conversations and discussions. Let's step back here because you had an interesting, sounds like kind of an interesting journey here. After your grandfather passed away, it sounds like this kind of led you into the work you're doing now. Can you take us back and kind of carry us through how all that transpired?
Sure. Being trained as I always tell people now, being trained as a lawyer, like we all evolve our story as we go, because I'm doing more of this full time in the future going forward. From like this month on, I'll be doing more psychic stuff as well as podcasting stuff. So when I start my story now, I'll say I was trained to be a lawyer. And what I'll basically say to you is I always knew I had some level of intuition. I just didn't know how far that went. And I knew that when my grandfather died, that 7 years before he died, I knew when he passed away, I'd be by myself with no one to console me, meaning like I'd have no one around me. And being in Tampa, I went to college here, New Jersey, where I'm from. I always have people around me. It's just, that's why I call myself the social psychic. I'm not one of those people that is usually at the time, especially, in 2004, I'm not one that was by myself with no one around me kind of thing. So when my grandfather actually died, he went up to New Jersey, had a stroke, a debilitating stroke. I did get to see him the day after his stroke. He couldn't communicate at that point. He would communicate by holding his hands a certain way. Like, it's hard to explain it, but it was like a special kind of communication. And it was horrible seeing him like that. But then my family was like, go back to work. Because I was in my first year of my law firm job at the time. He'll be back. You come back at the end of the week, grandpa will still be here. So I went back to work and went down to Tampa, and then got sent up to Wisconsin to cover a deposition for my boss at the time, not thinking I'd get stranded there overnight. And then when I'm there overnight in the hotel room at 8:07 p.m. my time, which was like 8:07 Eastern Standard Time or 7:07 my time, my mom calls to tell me grandpa passed. Well, when he died, she never knew about the premonition. I never told her. And I hung up the phone with her and I looked out and I'm like in this dark room, hotel room. And I'm thinking, oh my God, my premonition. That was the first thing I heard. I thought to myself. And then I was like, what do I do now? This is real. I'm by myself. And the man who helped raise me, father figure, because I was single parent family, he's gone. And it was exactly how I feared years earlier. Then these orbs of light came into my hotel room, like an Unsolved Mysteries episode. I feel like I was living my own Unsolved Mysteries episode. And basically, orbs of light came into the room and it was no longer dark. And a wave of unconditional love washed over me. And I felt my grandfather say, son, I love you. Don't ever grieve me. I'm with you. Go get some food for yourself, son. Take care of yourself. I love you. I'm always going to be with you. So I knew that was him. There was no way to even challenge that. I just felt it. I knew it. It was for the first time in a way that I got touched with that unconditional love and that wave. And I guess I didn't realize I was intuitive and opened up through that experience, become a psychic medium, because I went to the Panera Bread down the street in a rental car. And I remember my best friend from high school called me at the time, Tracy, and she's from where I grew up and she knew my grandfather, and her grandmother just died 6 months earlier at the time. And I remember telling her the story, as I just told you, with orbs of light and all that. And I felt her disbelieving me. She didn't say she was skeptical. I felt the energy of it. It's the best way I could describe it at this point. Now, in hindsight. So I said, well, if you're doubting me, how about if I tell you, what if your grandmother could say something to you? And she's like, well, my grandmother's been dead 6 months. That's not possible. And I said, if your grandmother could come through, what if she said she would remember the 6 years you spent with her as a little girl in the Poconos where she'd look after you and your sister at a cabin in the Poconos, which is right across the Pennsylvania border where we are in New Jersey, a couple hours away. And she was quiet. And I said, yeah, like I have an image of your grandmother taking the covers up to your head, kissing you on the forehead, being playful and telling you don't let the bed bugs bite. And I blurted that out, didn't even think much about it. Next thing you know, the phone drops, like a mic drop, but the phone drops. And her future husband picks up the phone and says, Jason, what did you say to Tracy? She's crying in the bathroom. And I'm like, no way. Are you kidding me? I don't know. I'm not sure. Then she grabs the phone and says, how did you know that? I go, how did I know what? Only my grandmother and I had that little secret thing with the bed bugs bite, whisper in my ear, put the covers up to my head. And for the first time, I knew I had a second mediumship in the same night. First one with myself, my grandfather, second one with my best friend from high school and her grandmother. And I left that and I went to the hotel and I slept with the lights on for like 10 years. Like I didn't want to be left alone because I didn't know what this meant. I was so confused by it. It took me a while to process it. And over the years between 2004 and 2017, I had my own journey. I would be in denial about it. I'd ignore it. And I'd be on a plane next to a woman who's grieving her daughter. And I'd be picking up on her daughter while we're 32,000 feet in the air. And I'd have to make the judgment call as I'm working as a lawyer. Should I tell her that I'm picking up her daughter? And then she'd bring up her daughter. And then I'd bring up her daughter. And we went back and forth like a volleyball game. And eventually I told her, your daughter is happy, when you go back to the house. She didn't tell me anything about the context of why she's flying. I said, when you go back to the house, get the seascape. Your daughter would love you to take the seascape. And she looked at me and she said, oh my God, my daughter painted a painting when she went through her divorce at the house. It's a beach house. And she painted the seascape. And I can't believe you knew that. So like, there's little glimpses of that a lot of the times where I figured out it's all about reassurance and clarity, helping people understand things better, getting people to connect with their loved ones so that they don't fear death. They don't have deep pent up grief and guilt for stuff that happened before the loved one passed away. A lot of that's all about releasing those energies, letting people heal and be happy and feel more at ease. That's what I find it's all about now. That's why I find this more gratifying for me than my prior law practice.
Yeah, that's interesting. And have you found though, as you kind of started moving over into the spiritual work, did you face some criticism from doing your law work?
Great question. And I had never had anyone ask me that, but I'll tell you this, for the first part of my journey, when I was a baby lawyer, so to speak, working in Mississippi, doing Hurricane Katrina cases, I wasn't in the best jurisdictions where people don't understand my lawyer can do these other things. And in terms of the mix between lawyer and psychic, since my best way of understanding how I should handle it, I looked at the ethics rules. There's nowhere in there that talks about, there's no provisions that anticipate if a lawyer is psychic. So I interpreted that to mean that I don't mix the two at all, that the psychic stuff's purely after hours. I put my lawyer hat on during business hours, psychics after hours. If any clients ever asked, they never did. I had the psychic name, so to speak, Jason Zook. So that shielded me for the first few years I started doing this openly. And then by the time this grew, we went into the pandemic. And everyone I worked with as a lawyer at that point were very accepting and open about me doing it because of my podcast. I had the Social Psychic radio show and I had some very strong success. So people were aware of my show so that when they listened to my show and saw the title, they knew that I was psychic. So it kind of became, no one overtly would bring it up as much. And even when I started my first law firm job, I remember I was in Mississippi telling people over the years, I pick up things and I'd guess pregnancies and I'd guess, people's relatives on the other side and all these various things. And then people just kind of learned to accept me because they knew as a package deal, I'm authentic, I'm sincere. I don't contrive any of this stuff. There's no reason to. And I think that anyone I've ever worked with, they know what my ethics are like and they know where I'm like so by the book sometimes that I have to, if I'm telling them that I'm picking up on someone's deceased relative and then they start realizing I'm doing it, there's not much they could say about it afterwards. They could just say, okay, it's something that, it's out there in the world.
Yeah, that's, it is fascinating that people with your abilities do the things you can do. And I wanted to kind of go back and ask, I know you said that this happened later in life after your grandfather's passing. A lot of times you'll find that people are in spiritual work, like you are in psychic mediumship type work. They had experiences as a kid. Sometimes they're repressed. Any
I had that
weird, strange kind of paranormal experience?
Yeah, I did. I could tell you for a fact that when I was a little kid, I used to always say things before they happen. I would just blurt them out. I'd be like, I'd say, Grandma, great grandpa on my dad's side is going to die today. And then he died. I didn't even realize it. Or I would just say things. And I remember my grandmother was very psychic because we came from Eastern Europe originally. The Czech Republic was like where we're from. So my grandmother, her whole life, and she grew up in, her decades were from the 20s to 2007. So, her early part of her life, she really had to be careful. So basically she grew up just keeping it private, not telling people. And then my mom doubted she ever had any gift, but now my mom later in life understands she does. And so, yeah, as an early age, I remember getting a lot of deja vu moments. I remember I used to blurt things out ahead of time. And I remember my grandmother who helped raise me because I lived in their house, my mom, my brother, and my grandfather and her. I was always told, don't talk about it. People won't understand it. Keep it to yourself. If you're picking up information, it might be some divine source. Just, let it kind of keep it to yourself as a hunch. And I remember my grandmother used to get itchy hands. Her palms would get itchy. And we lived outside of New York City. And my mom, I remember this, and then my mom brought it up the other day. My mom's like, do you remember when grandma used to get itchy hands and go to the racetrack and come back with all this money? And I was like, yeah, well, that's because she had itchy hands and she knew it's the day to go play the horses or whatever. And it was funny to see that because I never did that before. But my family, my mom, my grandma used to like go gamble casinos, and that's how they enjoyed their pastime. For me, it's, what can I do to gain guidance for myself, my own path, or that of others, either loved ones or people I work with or whatever. That's how I see it now. Like, it's kind of morphed into this thing for me. It's, if somebody can, call a psychic and get some guidance on stuff in their life, I always tell people before you see me or any psychic, though, you should get mental health handled first. Because I've had people try to come to me in the reverse, where they try to come to me with their anxiety and their depression, thinking I'm going to wave a wand over the phone call or through the Zoom or in person. And I learned to tell them, I'm not a mental health counselor. I'm not a mental health professional. And I've actually discontinued readings at the beginning when I realized that that's what was going on. And sometimes they get frustrated with me, but I feel like it's better to tell somebody. If you're really deeply grieving somebody, you want to wait a little bit before you go to a psychic. You don't want to go the day after your relative dies and you're crying hysterically, calling me on a phone thinking I'm going to be able to help you, because I could try, but I'm not a mental health grief person and I'm not an expert. So you need to see that person first, get that part of it handled. And when you're in the better mindset, that's when I can do the better thing of working with you. Plus, I consider what I do entertainment value. I'm not a doctor. I am a lawyer, but I'm not a doctor. And I consider what I've done with this is all, yes, there's validity to it. I pick up things, but I enjoy making people feel better through, connecting with them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I started kind of as a skeptic, if you will. Came from, a military background, and I kind of slowly moved into this in the paranormal. I got into paranormal investigating eventually. Like I said, kind of from a skeptical point of view initially, but I always had that curiosity as well, as there's something to it. And I'm curious, as a young child, did you perhaps ever see people who had passed on, and maybe you were scared to talk about it or scared to?
I would sense them. I sense energies. I can sense energies. As a child, I would sense my grandfather's uncle, because he lived at our house before he passed away, my uncle Zahar from Russia, actually, because I have some Russian descent in my family. But I sensed his energy a lot, and my mom would confirm that it was his energy. It was kind of weird how we knew that. We would just talk about like it's normal. In terms of going into other people's houses, I could sense really well. If there was some heavy energy there, I would sometimes have to let people know, let's leave the light on. As a little kid, I'm talking about. But I feel like as I got older, you can kind of especially your own living space, you can kind of, pray a lot. And I sage, I pray. I kind of mix my original Catholic upbringing with the, sage and keeping positive space and energies. And I do that now. And I haven't had, thank God, in years, have anything disturb me in my sleep. When I first started this stuff in the early 2000s, I used to have stuff wake me up in my sleep. Even if I had a low light on, like a small light, I would have stuff like interrupt my arms. My arms would go up in my sleep. My legs would get moved. It was weird. And I never understood. At first, I thought I might have like some type of lazy leg thing or whatever they call that. But I feel like spiritually, it was like because I was like a lighthouse. And I had to learn to shut that down when I'm asleep. And basically through the power of like just praying and intention, I just say, my sleep space is my sleep space. I need it. And I keep a little protective bubble around myself. I imagine it before I pass out, and it keeps me comfortable through the night. Before I learned how to do those kind of things, yeah, I'd get things that would interrupt me and stuff. But I figured out it's probably because if you're a lighthouse to the other side, and if you're a spirit on the other side, and you want to communicate with loved ones, and I happen to be coming in contact somehow with those loved ones, it makes sense to me. I would try to reach out to those people too if I was on the other side. It's like we're like AT&T to them, or Verizon or something. We're like the vehicle to allow them to come through. Is how I see it.
Yeah, and it's I think the unfortunate thing for some people is, and it's not, obviously when I got into the paranormal and had experiences myself, when I got into investigating the paranormal, it really opened me up to these other possibilities, to a much more vast universe, if you will, than kind of what I was raised to believe in. And so I guess where I'm going with this is, you know, I would have an experience and I would try and talk myself out of it. Again, I go back to that skeptical nature that I had. And, I would tell myself, well, maybe your mind is playing tricks on you. Maybe you really didn't see that. So I dealt with that a lot. But the other thing that I wanted to bring up here is I think it's for us who don't have those special gifts that you possess. When a loved one passes on, we don't get that clarity. And, do you deal with that, or people talk to you about that a lot? Because, we all want to get those answers.
I would love, I'd love to be able to answer. Yeah. Here's my take on that. And this is something as I said, we are all on a journey. Every day I do this stuff, I learn new meanings behind it, right? One of the ideas I'll say to people now, and I wouldn't even say this a month ago, but this is something I picked up on recently. If you think about trying to go stargazing, and I know you're into UFOs and stuff like that, and I am too, by the way. I saw a UFO with my best friend Megan. She's seen them many times before. I'll say this. When you try to go stargazing and you're living like New York City or some big, metropolitan area, you look up at the sky and you can see hardly anything but maybe smog or clouds or what you think is fog.
Light pollution, yeah.
Yeah, light pollution. Right. And then you go out in the middle of the country where there's nothing, like the middle of the woods, wilderness, nature, and you could see this cosmos that it amazes you and delights you at the same time. Well, I'll use that analogy. I talk to people in analogies a lot when I give readings to people, short little examples. Just like I gave you that example with the light pollution, I will use that same connection to you to say that if any of us want to connect with our deceased loved ones, think of the light pollution, the thoughts that are in our head, our self-doubt, our denial, our disbelief, are just thinking it's not possible. And if you were to clear those thoughts out of your head through meditation and prayer and being able to think of the right intentions and understanding things with an open mind, think then how the subtle Wi-Fi signal of your loved one, because that's what they are at this point. They're a subtle Wi-Fi signal that like our cell phones can pick up on. If we can get rid of that clutter in our head and meditate and be more mindful and be open, that if you get spiritual cues as breadcrumbs, they're real. They're not just some strange example of someone's voice that you remember to be your grandmother's, or, oh, well, that jacket looks like the one my grandfather got me as a kid in your dream. Well, maybe that's because he's trying to send you a signal. They talk in like symbolic terms sometimes. The way it comes through is like charades. So you may have some dreams and think that those dreams don't have any correlation when in fact they do. And that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. They come back in breadcrumbs. They leave you like a spiritual Morse code. And if you can figure out how to look at the numbers, the time of day, the thought that pops in your head while you're thinking, it's about it's like a situational Morse code. So if I'm thinking about my grandfather saying, oh, I wish this is a real life thing that happened to me. 2008. I really wish my grandfather and my grandmother, I had their last card they gave me because my grandmother just passed. First birthday ever without both of them. And I was like, oh, I wish I had that card. Oh my God, I don't keep cards. I wish I had it. I fell asleep. My grandfather comes to me in a dream on my birthday now and says, happy birthday, son. I love you. When you get up, I don't care what time it is. Go clean out your closet. I woke up at 2 a.m. I look up at the ceiling and I'm like, oh my God, it's 2 a.m. My grandfather just told me happy birthday. Thank you, Grandpa. I love you too. I got up, went into the closet at 2 a.m., throw boxes over my shoulders, and I found the card. It was in the top of a trunk. Didn't think it existed. I found the last birthday card that they had sent me for my birthday from 5 years earlier. My example of sharing that is you can sometimes have some subtle, like sad thought and then fall asleep and your mom, whoever it is on the other side, pops in the dream. They pop in the dream to reassure you, not just because it's a coincidence. And the more you can realize that, and as an audience member, anyone at this point, the more you can realize that when you die, it's like ascending, you're graduating. You're not, people look at tombstones and think, well, that's where their loved one is. No, that's like going to a junkyard to look at your first car. You're not going to find the person's spirit 6 feet under the ground. That's their physical remains while they're here, their vehicle. Their energy is still with you. You can talk to your loved one from your couch, from your bathroom, from your bedroom, in your car, in traffic. It doesn't matter. And the more you can realize that, it's by going inwards, mindfulness, removing the clutter, allowing yourself to receive messages and journal. If you journal, automatic writing, I practice all those things. And I find the more I do that, it's like once you keep that open line and you learn how to differentiate between the cluttered thoughts and what comes through and trust it as it is, that's how I've developed it. And I think a lot of people can do that. You just have to learn to go on a spiritual journey within yourself. And most of the time when loved ones come through, it's about spiritually awakening us.
Yeah, it's remarkable to think that they couldn't be reaching out to us. The difficult thing is to try and clear away that noise and clutter. And I think it's difficult for a lot of us.
It is.
Got so many things going on. And to be able to kind of silence that and quiet.
You know what I recommend? Guided meditations. Get on YouTube, type in guided meditation for whatever, relaxation. I'm telling you, that'll work. It works for me, at least. I think it will work for anyone, though.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm sure a lot of other people can relate to me in terms of just trying to quiet the mind and trying to clear away that clutter can be difficult, especially if you have young children or anything like that. I mean, things just kind of get busy and crazy. So yeah, I mean, thank you for that advice, because I think, a lot of us can use that, maybe trying to find clear away that time to kind of, set aside things and, kind of try and get rid of the clutter and the noise and just have quiet time and, meditation, that sort of thing. I want to talk about the idea of ghosts. So I'm in the paranormal. I've had a lot of strange experiences that to this day I cannot explain away, even though I've tried. I often wonder, are we experiencing disincarnate spirits, people that have just refused to move on? Or is it actually people who have moved on and are communicating with us still when we're doing our investigation? So I'm just kind of curious what your take is.
Interestingly enough, I have got last October, my best friend and I went on a local news program here in Tampa, and we went to a haunted place in Ybor City, which is a part of Tampa that's like the oldest section. And we walked around the building on the outside and picked up on the fact that there was a fire. We picked up on all these details. And then the reporter went and checked with a local historian and had that air after we talked. And everything we came up with was like, dun, 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 they checked off. And people ask, how do you do that? And I think sometimes buildings, places, and things and locations have residual energies. And I don't do as much with like demons and the stuff you see like on ghost hunting shows and stuff like that. I'm not open to it. But my thing is, I think, and I've sensed this, I'm very sensitive to energies. And so when you go into an older building and you can feel something and you feel like it's disruptive, it's probably some residual of some prior energy that lived there or was there and connected to it. And so I know there's stuff like that because I've experienced it. Can I tell you if that's a live energy versus like an energy? If I say energy is constant and when we die, we're not really dead, so to speak. We're still alive because 99.9% of our personality and substance of who we are remains. Our physical body leaves with our physical maladies and mental health issues. That's the physical. But spiritual energy is spiritual energy. It's constant. So I'm sure there's a possibility. There's all different possibilities of spiritual combinations, but I believe that there is a strong likelihood that places can have residual energies or energetic presences, spiritual presences. And my way of answering that is that's just my understanding of it. Now, I'm still evolving. I haven't been to tons of sites that are, historically haunted or anything like that to tell you that I've studied 10 properties and I'm very experiential because of my lawyer training. So when I do these things, I speak more from a position of authority from experiences I've had. And like the stuff that I've dealt with, like even people who've committed suicide that come through to talk to their parents, they're not in hell. They're on the other side and they're clear thinking and they didn't mean to kill themselves most of the time. They wanted to shout out for help and unfortunately they were successful in killing themselves. Stuff like that comes through all the time as messages. And I feel like that kind of messaging is coming through where they can also watch the loved one paint a house, get a haircut, buy a new car months after they're passing. To me, that relays they're still connected to us and we're like their reality show. And I'm talking about deceased loved ones more than just general spirits. Because I believe that our deceased loved ones are connected to us through the energy of love. The love we feel is also the energy that transcends space and time when they cross over to keep us connected to them still.
Yeah, and it's kind of a consistent theme I get most people that are involved in the kind of work you're involved in. From your perspective, is there any sort of hellish state when we pass on?
I will tell you this, from the thousands of people who've come through on the other side when I do readings, none of them go quote scripture. None of them say Jesus or, anything like that. It's very neutral. They're just like, hey, when I cross over, it's like fall asleep on the couch while watching TV. It's a subtle thing when you cross from one to the other. It's designed, if you think of it this way, if I was to tell you that you, or anyone in the audience, if I was to say you're breathing right now, you'd say, duh, yeah, I know I'm breathing, but I'm like, pay attention to your breath. Do you notice your breath go in and out every second? No. Why? Because it's natural for us not to pay attention to it. It's autonomic. It's a part of nature. Breathing is a part of nature. Where this is how I break it down. So the way it's been explained to me, if you think of birth, we don't remember when we're born, right? I don't know anyone who I could talk to that says, I remember when I was born. You don't remember usually, you're breathing, and when you cross over, why would that be any different? It's a subtle process, just like those are subtle processes. So you cross over and then you're assigned a greeter, a loved one that you're close with. Like in my case, it could be my mom, my grandfather, someone like that. And they connect to you and they let you know pretty quickly, orientating you. This is where you're at. You're not on the other side anymore. You're on our side. And the person's usually disappointed. Like, all the buildup for this, like that's usually what they say. All the buildup for this. Like, why couldn't you guys just tell us early in life? We wouldn't have to worry about death, and it's like graduating or ascending. Most people probably wouldn't take the life here as serious as we do because we think this is our only shot. And in my opinion, I believe we learn here. We go through pain, we go through struggles. I've seen enough of that over the years, but I also know we go through, exceptional times and exciting moments and loving relationships and connectedness. So we have a whole spectrum of all those things.
How about this idea here that this is not the only life we live. This is not the only incarnation, that we live multiple lives.
I can tell you that I have some validity, I believe, to past lives, meaning that you can go back and learn again and again. And that's my belief. When I've read for people in the past, I've picked up, I'll give you an example. Someone comes to me and they have a severe fear of flying and they don't understand it. They've never really been on a plane much, but now they have to go fly to Europe with their husband because they're going to celebrate something. And I talk to them and I'm like, how come you have that fear? And they're like, I don't know. And then I start reading them in a reading and just start talking to them. I said, well, is it okay if I tell you what I'm picking up energetically about a past life if you're open to it? Sure. And I'm like, I feel like you fought in World War II in the Pacific Theater and that you actually crashed a plane and died. And then this person, before they tell me they had a fear of flying, they're like, oh my God, I had this profound fear of flying my entire life and no one's ever explained that to me, but that might make sense. Why I'm afraid in this lifetime of the residual fear of flying. And there's been instances like that over the years because you'll come across it. And I feel like some of us do have past lives. Some of us do. Like, I feel like I'm connected to World War II in Europe. Even though my grandfather fought in World War II as a little kid, I was watching documentaries. I was watching one right before this show. I watch them all the time. I'll watch the same ones over and over. It doesn't matter. I, for some reason, could just veg out and watch World War II documentaries, usually European theater, and then years later, I've had psychics tell me in different times, they've talked to me, you have a prior life where you were on my show. I had a psychic come on and tell me that they picked up on a prior life with me in World War II on one of my episodes, and that I was involved in like espionage or something and got caught and killed. But you just never know from your past experiences where you could be, but I think it's all about learning and growing and upgrading and becoming better versions of ourselves. That's how I understand it to be.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of comforting to think that, you already touched on it. I mean, that some people believe this is it. You get one shot, and if you don't get it right, you get one or two choices. To me, it's reassuring to think that, this is not the only time we have to get it right. Although we probably want to live life as best we can and try and get it right.
Absolutely.
But on the other hand, I've always kind of, just to be perfectly honest, I've always struggled with that, hey, I was raised a Christian. Just that idea that we either get it right this time, and if we don't, well,
You got to
sorry.
have a certain order to society. You got to have bookends at a bookshelf. If you had bookshelves without any bookends, things would fall over the place. So I think society itself was structured in such a way where you had to give people a clear, easy choice, especially hundreds of years ago. Because if you didn't, people would deviate all over the place. But if you make it, if you don't do this, you'll go to hell. If you do this and you're within our confines, you're right. You're on the good track. At least I think, and I've asked my spirit guides, I call them, people on the other side I communicate with, why are we so stringent with our interpretation of spirituality? Why is there only so many faiths? Why is there so much, rigorous dogma, as I would call it? And I was raised to be open-minded. Like, I didn't become Catholic till I was in law school, and I decided to do it because it was more of I grew up in a Catholic town, so I felt like it was like my home roots. And then I became Catholic, studied it, enjoyed the study of it. And then once I became psychic, I was like, I started expanding my spirituality to accept other things as like meditation and anything that heals, I believe can have a good, valid purpose. So if you're a devout religious person and you find peace in that and you love God and God loves you back, and that's I believe that heavily. I feel like that's awesome. Just don't distort religion and scripture to try to judge others, because Jesus would never do that. I'm not meaning to speak on your show about stuff like that, but my opinion is we're meant to help each other. We're meant to work together. We're meant to like elevate ourselves. And that's what I believe religion's supposed to do.
Right. Okay, so it looks like we are back after a little bit of a technical snafu, and talking with Jason here, and we were talking about a little bit about the afterlife, kind of the expectations a lot of people have, the fear perhaps. Jason, do you deal with a lot of people who talk to you about fear of what's going to happen when they do pass on?
I think fear is one of the primary emotions a lot of people come when they seek for readings. They have fear of the unknown, fear of the future, fear of the afterlife, fear of themselves. And it's kind of like trying to show someone not to be as fearful. Don't live in fear as much. And usually my readings take that tone when I talk to people.
Now, is this kind of fear of judgment or fear of things they've done in this life and what they are expecting to be judged about?
It's a mixture. I think a lot of people who come to me, they have fear entrenched in them the way they were raised, just like our parents can instill values on us, they can also instill anxiety and fear. If you're raised in a way to have those kind of what if thoughts. And when I had my cancer a couple of years ago, I extinguished what if thoughts after that, because I learned how to compartmentalize my fears. And I realized that unless it's going to happen, everything you're worrying about is likely never going to be reality. But it's like a software that glitches in your computer. That's why I say mental health awareness is so important. And even with fear and anxiety, there's things you can do to help bring that into line where it doesn't have to be debilitating in your life. And I tell anyone who comes to me, I say, don't be hostage to your fears anymore. And if you learn not to do that, and over time, this is a process. It doesn't happen like you wake up next day and you're in a different point of view. But I feel like over time, you could really develop a better way of handling the stress and anxiety we've all been dealt the last few years. And that's what I try to tell people is like through meditation and being mindful and having an awareness of a larger purpose than what a lot of us probably pay attention to on a daily basis, you can eliminate a lot of those insecurities and fears. And over time, you won't feel as hostage to your own like negative thinking. I'm all about positive thinking too.
Yeah, we've certainly dealt with a lot of fear over the last couple of years with the whole COVID pandemic, and all that going on. It almost feels like, I know we're not totally out of the woods on this, but it almost feels like that's kind of lifting some. Maybe it's just the fear-based stuff is just not holding people back as much.
But I'll say one thing about the COVID thing. I think it showed us the exacerbated, like it showed us the worst things we could deal with ourselves, right? A lot of people dealt with like relationship issues. A lot of marriages might have failed. People might have left jobs. I'm actually an example of someone changing careers. But I also think it may have showed us also how to approach our lives and live our truest version of our life possible. I think a lot of people are on that road right now. For maybe You think about our grandparents, they stay at the same job for 40 years, retire, and that's where they live. They got a plaque, for a lot of people now, our jobs are like water. They're fluid, they travel, they're all over the place. So I think this pandemic may have shown a lot, especially younger people, life's short and fleeting and make the best of every day. And I believe there's a good part of that. I know there's anxiety associated with what happened, but I also think there's a renaissance going on right now.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. Now, when you say a renaissance, are you talking purely about the COVID pandemic, or do you feel like there's kind of a spiritual renaissance going on?
I say spiritual renaissance. I should have said that the way what I meant is there's an awakening going on. People are realizing we're not just a 3D world. We're not just time, matter, space. There's more to us than meets the eye. And that I believe if one of the things I say is we're spiritual beings living in physical bodies. And the more we can understand that and realize that, it's not going to seem so out of the ordinary if someone could be a medium and another person could be an empath and someone else could be able to pick up on, things from the past or be intuitive. Mother's intuition. There's things that we just kind of just lump all together, but there's so many different indicators that we all have some intuitive abilities. Everyone, I'm sure, has had the deja vu moment where they're thinking about their loved one, their partner, their mom, whoever. And the next thing you know, you get a text message from that person within a small window of time. You're like, well, that's coincidence. Well, what if it happens a lot to you? Then is that coincidence? Or are you tuning into something that you just don't realize or pay attention to?
Yeah, for me, it's been a couple of times there's been strange synchronicities that
I think that's a law of nature. I think synchronicity is a law of nature, like gravity. We just haven't really studied it in depth yet.
Yeah, and you touched on something here. You and I talked a little bit before we started recording here about, the UFO phenomena. You kind of follow it. What say you? A lot of people say there's a spiritual aspect to this phenomena. What say you about that? Do you believe there's some spiritual aspect to?
I think there's spirituality to everything. I think our animals are spiritual, and I think that, and the reason I say that is when it comes to aliens, who are we to say that some advanced life form? Because if they're coming to us, they're advanced. I can tell you, Megan, my best friend Megan Kane, who's on my new show, Me Psychic Visions, she was talking about aliens from the day I met her, and at first I was like, okay, we can each believe what we want to believe. I wasn't really open-minded at first. And then my own journey has made me more open-minded, because if I can communicate with the other side and get premonitions and have all these things happen, and who am I to say aliens aren't real? And then we went stargazing at one of her properties in Eastern Hillsborough County. And that's the night that I saw an object that looked like a little star, and it went down 90 degrees, to the left 90 degrees, up 90 degrees, and shot off. So it was something that took 3 90-degree turns, like a square, shot off. And before it did that, I felt it connect to me intuitively and telepathically, basically telling me we're just passing through. We're not harming anyone. And as soon as it said that to me, it shot off. And I was like, well, I believe that our life forms can go in such a way where they can learn to be part of the larger consciousness. And so if you think of the spiritual component of other life forms, I'd say, yeah, they can probably, that's the spiritual element of it. I think they can go to a higher consciousness and communicate with us. And I think the same type of thing that I pick up on when I pick up on the other side, they're able to do that from their own evolution and living thousands of years more than us with their technology. It may have helped them. I feel like we're going to discover something in the next 20 to 30 years in our own technology that'll be able to show the actual transition from our physical life and our physical bodies to our spiritual energetic bodies, meaning where we transcend, ascend. There's going to be something like that. That's a study done, and it's going to show the subtle energies that happen when it shows the energy leaving the body. That's my prediction. I've said that on other shows. I'll say it here. So when it happens in 20, 30 years and someone can pull the tape, they'll say, hey, remember you said that way back when? In 2022. And I'll be like, well, okay, let's go to the tape, but I believe that.
Hey, play the tape. Hey, Jason, I hope you're right about that. I hope I live long enough to see that. That would be truly remarkable. I think when, I've kind of quietly followed the UFO issue, UFO phenomena for many, many years, going way back to my military days. And when I did have conversations with people sometimes, and you'd watch them close down right in front of you, like, oh, you just feel the air sucked out. When you brought up the topic, when we saw these Navy videos come out, I think a lot of us felt some vindication, because it was like, yes, there is something to this phenomena. We're not all crazy. People are seeing things, they're experiencing things, and not people from all walks of life. So, yeah, thank you for commenting about that. I personally do think there's a spiritual aspect or spiritual dimension, if you will, to the phenomena.
I'll
And
say this. One of my favorite shows is like Ancient Aliens. I like to nerd out and watch that on Friday nights. I'll watch the Ancient Alien marathons. I'm all into that stuff, and Roswell and Independence Day. And it's a whole culture. And I feel like I think the government's rolling that stuff out for a reason. I think that they are in communication with aliens. And I believe that the technologies that we're growing and learning how to use are, I believe, I mean, we all have our own belief sets, but I think who are we to say that we don't have that? I mean, until it's disproven, I'm one of those people like, hey, anything's possible.
right. Yeah, and I wanted to. This is kind of going back to earlier in our interview here, but you talked about getting feelings and having feelings of when spiritual energy is around. Do you ever see it? Do you ever see it like you're seeing me now?
I have seen spiritual energy. I am able to describe it. It's where I can see the remnants of it, the energetic remnants of it to describe. Basically, the other side communicates with us through memories, through images, through visions, through the five spiritual senses, so to speak. But that, in that respect, I'm able to describe people I'm talking to or who I've communicated with. They come through.
Yeah, one of the things that kind of baffles us as paranormal investigators is we have, and I don't know if you've heard of the team, you probably heard of the term EVP or electronic voice phenomena. We will get a voice, some sort of imprint on the digital voice recorder, something we didn't hear at the time, and then we're playing our recorders back, and there is, plain as day, there's a voice there. You know, analyze it upwards, downwards, every other direction. We can't explain it. It's obviously not any of our voices. Different type of vocal tone, that sort of thing. We've gotten hundreds of these things, well, really thousands, if I count everybody in the group that I've worked with all these years. If they don't have vocal cords, how are we hearing them?
Energy. They're able to manipulate the energy on the recording, just like they're able to. I had a reading that gives me a great example. I had a reading about a year ago where I was reading for some woman that her son died, and the lights kept flickering in my house, and my lights never flicker in my house. Not like that's a normal situation. And I said, did your son used to flicker the switch? She goes, you mean the lights? I said, he did it all the time. I said, well, he's doing it right now. And as soon as I said that to her, her lights started flickering. We were in two different locations. And I know that spiritual energies can manipulate our energy. So they can manipulate times of day. They can, the clocks on your like cable, like they can alert you to when a certain 333222111 kind of thing. They can do the EVPs like you're talking about. I've had videos where I'll take a selfie in a building or I'll be outside and then orbs of light appear afterwards that I didn't see during the actual recording of the selfie or the video I took of footage. And it's interesting when you see those things because you're like, well, wait a minute, that wasn't like that when I looked at it, when I recorded it. Well, it's like your EVP, it appears afterwards. And I believe that stuff happens for a reason. Just like, I mean, there's a rhyme and reason to this stuff. We may not understand it right now, but at some point in the future, we will. And like an EVP could be an early version of me telling you where our technology is going to catch up to be able to actually pick up on this stuff. Because if you think of EVPs and our ability to record those, 40 years ago, we didn't have them as prevalent as we have them today. So that's an example right there of technology catching up to prove the existence of spirituality.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that also kind of makes us scratch our head is it's not like a lot of times they may be random, but there's other times where they're obviously intelligent. There's something been said that is a comment about something we're doing. I've had my name called, that sort of thing. So some of them seem to be fairly random. Others seem to be intelligent. So, you'll get people say, well, maybe that should just have voice outside bleeding through to you, and, how do it's very hard to explain when we do get the intelligent type of responses. It's very hard to kind of explain that, especially when it's in reference to either something you're doing, it's your name called, that sort of thing. So sometimes, like I said, they're also very random, but when we get those types and they're not as frequent, it is pretty remarkable when you get an intelligent type response.
Absolutely. I think anything that can show or provide, there's an opportunity for us to believe there's more than what we just think we are ourselves, an awareness. It can be enlightening because it makes us see that the way the world was. Like, I'll give you an example. When I was a little kid, I used to study astronomy, and we learned back then about the 9 planets and, the sun in our solar system. And since then, in the last 40 years, it's become an exoplanet, Pluto. And we went from just learning about our solar system, learning about the galaxy and learning about the universe and all these billions of Earth-like planets. And that's in 40 years. So who are we to say that the way we understand and perceive spirituality will not in and of itself alter or change as we expand ourselves with the universe? We'll also be expanding ourselves with spirituality at some point. Once we can realize that and understand it, I think there will be a blow in the right direction with that stuff.
I also wanted to ask you, Jason, because we talked briefly about, some of the stuff you see on TV shows about the demonic, demons, that sort of thing. I've never come across it. 8-9 years I've been doing paranormal investigating. Anything like that, bad energy, dark type of spirits, anything like that you've dealt with in the course of doing psychic type work?
Great question. I have not encountered anything like that myself. The closest I've gotten to that is I remember I've had a dinner party that a group of women invited me to their house, and I went to it right before COVID, so a couple of years ago, and I showed up, and it's a large house, and I'm walking room by room, and I'm describing energies that I'm picking up on previous houses that were on that property, that they knew the history. And I'm picking up on, at this side of the house, there's, this older woman that used to smoke cigarettes here. There was another structure there where a woman lived for 40 years and she smoked cigarettes on her front porch. And I could get names of people. I don't pick up on demonic energies and possessions and stuff. And I know there's shows out there that get great ratings doing that stuff. And I'm not disproving that there aren't energy forces out there. I'm not one. I just have not personally dealt with one like that. So, and and I've had people try to call me and say, can you remove a curse? I'm like, no, I don't do that. That's not what I do. That's outside my pay grade. Right. I just try to simplify the spiritual side of ourselves. Like, that's how I look at it. In other words, we can all connect over time by dulling those negative thoughts and that clutter, that light pollution kind of thing. And we can connect with our other side and connect to our relatives. And I believe very strongly and firmly in that. I think that no matter how alone we may feel on occasion, we're all one fabric. The universe is one fabric. We're all part of that fabric. And so, things like our social struggles and stuff don't make sense to me. Because I'm like, if we're all the same energy inside different bodies, but we're all the same energy on the inside, like Cadbury eggs have the inside that's the same, why are we judging each other for being different when in reality we're not different? We're spiritually the same. And just because I happen to have lighter skin than you doesn't make me better than you. You know what I mean? Like the common sense stuff that you think that our society should get past at some point, it's still there. How are aliens supposed to talk to us when we can't even talk to each other, right? Like, they're not going to come down to the planet and introduce themselves if we can't even have a certain level of evolution within ourselves to accept each other as equals. Spiritually, that's something that always just doesn't make sense to me.
Right. And a lot of it's in the name of politics, that sort of thing. People already have kind of formulated opinions and it seems like people get into the political sphere and they kind of it's almost like they have a default response to something somebody else says. And it's unfortunate because I think we as, and I speak of humans in general, but we just have a tendency to kind of devolve into that kind of maybe that energy, if you will. And it's unfortunate. It's one of the reasons why I don't like to turn on the news very often, especially if it's CNN, Fox, whatever. They're spinning it a certain way, and
I tune in on there just to see how could they create their angle on this. Like, not to get into that too much, but I'll put on there and I'll be like, okay, so how are they explaining this controversy right now? And you turn on, like, they're not even covering this. They're talking about something that has absolutely nothing to do with any of the issues I'm concerned about. So obviously I'm in a different media chamber.
They're just on their own spins. So it's unfortunate, but that's a lot of what you get when you turn on the news. One other thing, I know we're getting short on time here. There's a lot, people are involved in spiritual work. They talk about spirit guides. They also talk about people, I've had near-death experiencers on the show talk about their experience, or people that have studied or written about near-death experiences. One common theme is a life review that people go through. Has anything come up like that for you and your work?
The closest thing I've had to that, I was under anesthesia after I had my cancer, and I was basically under anesthesia for a colonoscopy for a half hour. And during that process, I wound up, so I just had my cancer removed after my cancer surgery, and I was going in for another surgery for my diverticulitis. I went in, and then I was all of a sudden, after I went out, I'm in this beautiful garden. And my grandfather comes to me, my grandmother's there, other relatives I never recognized are there. And there's this love. And if I was to describe our reality of when you look around the room, if you and I are talking right now and you look in front of you, behind you, you feel like this is reality. To me, this would feel like black and white TV from the 1950s. And if you think of like 8K TV or whatever, the most advanced version, where everything's just so luminous and so beautiful, and the wave of unconditional love washed over me again. So I knew I was somewhere that was a magnificent place. It was a garden, and I just felt like this peace. And my grandfather came to me and said, "Son, I love you. When you come back after you are here, you're going to come too, and tell your mom you're not going to predecease her. You're going to live a full life. Your mom's going to die naturally a full life, and when she's supposed to die. In other words, I'm not going to die before my mom, and she's not going to live with her son dead before her," is basically the gist. So I called my mom. I said, "By the way, I just saw grandpa. This is what he said." And she started bawling her eyes out. My mom's not a very emotional person. And she tells me, "I have to call you back." Then she calls me back, and she's like, she got herself together. And she's like, "I said a prayer for 60 days when you were going through your cancer situation. And all I said every night was I pray to Jesus. And then I'd pray to grandpa, my dad. And I'd say, 'Dad, please, God, please help me. I don't want to be a mother that watches my son die from cancer in front of me. I want to live my life fully. And then I want my son to live his life. Just please, God, just promise me that.'" And so my grandfather came back to tell me those details without my knowledge of it, was in response to what my mom was praying every night for 60 days. And to me, that's an example of like a lower level example of what a near-death experience would be like. But I feel like when you really tune into those things, and if they happen to you, it usually has a greater meaning of reassurance, clarity, comfort, guidance, support. Those are always the themes I get on spiritual things that happen to average people. And you'll notice that people who undergo spiritual things, they're more accepting, they're more calmer, they're patient. They look at life from a totally different point of view.
Yeah, that's a remarkable story. And that does seem to be a pretty consistent theme with people who have had near-death experiences. Is the, whatever you want to call it, the realm that they transition into, at least for a brief period of time, seems to be even more real than this, if you want to call it the reality we're in now.
Yeah.
Well, Jason, great discussion. I really enjoyed talking with you tonight. Really appreciate spending the time with me.
That was a pleasure, man.
So
What a joy.
We had a little technical snafu, but we persevered and got through here. So once again, thank you for spending the time with me. Talk about website, how people get in touch with you. They want to do a session with you.
Great.
What they can kind of expect from that.
Yeah, a couple of things. My website is thesocialpsychic.com. And also on Instagram and most social media, you'll look and you can find me under The Social Psychic. I have a new show I'm launching in a couple of weeks called Psychic Visions. It's signed with Electrocast Media. My best friend Megan Kane and I are on it. That'll be coming out shortly. I would say check that out. Check out my website. Check out social media. My show is called The Social Psychic Radio Show. I just won 2 Great Communicator Awards for that, and diversity and best spirituality episodes. So, check out my show too. I always like to put different topics out there, and feel free to reach out to me if you'd like. And I'm open to answering any questions anyone might have. Thank you so much for bringing me on the show, and I really enjoyed being your guest.
All right. Thanks again, Jason, and congrats on the success of your show, and have a great rest of your night.